My family made me host every holiday for 20 years, only to criticize every detail while praising my brother for just showing up. The constant disrespect was exhausting, so I set a clever trap with a single binder that would expose their hypocrisy and burn the unfair tradition to the ground. This is where decades of resentment finally boil over, and you won't believe how it unfolds. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through. We love hearing from you. What's a holiday tradition you're glad you don't have to do anymore? Let us know in the comments. The call came on a Tuesday. It was a gray, drizzly afternoon in late March, the kind of day that saps the color from the world and makes your bones feel weary. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten on the coaster beside me, trying to summon the energy to start sketching out a menu for Easter. For 23 years, every major holiday had been my responsibility. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, even the 4th of July, they all happened at my house, orchestrated by my hand. It was a tradition forged not from joy, but from assumption. It had started when my children were small and our house was the biggest, and it had simply never stopped. My phone buzzed on the side table, displaying a picture of my mother, Margaret. I sighed, a small, tired puff of air. I knew what this was about. She was calling to check in, which was her code for delivering a post-mortem of our last family gathering, Christmas, which was now 3 months in the rearview mirror. My mother believed that critiques, like fine wine, improved with age. I pressed the green button and put the phone on speaker. "Brittany, dear, how are you?" Her voice was crisp, carrying the practiced, airy tone of someone who never had to raise their voice to be heard. "I'm fine, Mom, just a quiet day. How are you?" "Oh, I'm wonderful. I just had lunch with Carol," she said, referring to my cousin. "We had such a lovely time. She was telling me all about their Christmas. They went to her son's house this year. Apparently, her new daughter-in-law is a marvelous cook, just marvelous." I stayed silent, gripping the arm of the chair. I knew this path. It was a well-trodden, thorny trail designed to lead to one destination, my inadequacy. "Carol said the gravy was just perfect," Mom continued, her voice dripping with casual admiration. "So smooth, not a single lump. She said she could have drunk it from a cup." A lump formed in my own throat, my Christmas gravy. For Christmas dinner, which had involved 26 guests, a 20-pound turkey, 3 kinds of potatoes, 7 side dishes, and 4 homemade desserts, the singular takeaway for my mother had been a few small lumps in the gravy. It was a flaw she had mentioned on Christmas Day, and again on New Year's, and now here it was again, resurrected in March. The lumps had become legendary, a symbol of my failure. "That's nice for them," I said, my voice tight. "It is," she chirped. "It's just so nice when the younger generation takes an interest. Anyway, dear, I was just thinking about Easter. It's only a few weeks away. Have you decided on ham or lamb? David was saying he hopes it's ham. You know how he loves your honey-glazed ham." And there it was, the pivot. The effortless turn from criticizing my last Herculean effort to laying out expectations for the next one. My brother, David, wouldn't lift a finger to help, of course. He would show up an hour late, wearing a handsome sweater, and my mother would greet him as if he'd just returned from a heroic voyage. He would eat the food I'd spent days preparing, offer a lazy, everything's great, Brit, and be lauded as the perfect son for simply gracing us with his presence. Something inside me, a tightly wound spring of resentment that I had been compressing for 2 decades, finally snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, clean fracture. The exhaustion I felt was suddenly heavier than the gray sky outside. It was a soul-deep weariness that came from years of running a race where someone else kept moving the finish line, all while telling you that you weren't running fast enough. "Mom," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me, distant and calm. "I haven't thought about Easter yet." "Well, you'd better get a move on," she said with a light laugh. "You don't want to be caught out. Remember that year you couldn't find a big enough ham?" I did remember. I had ended up driving to 3 different towns to find one, a quest I'd undertaken with a screaming toddler and a surly preteen in the backseat. David had been on a ski trip in Aspen that year. My husband, Michael, walked into the room then, holding 2 fresh cups of tea. He saw the look on my face, the phone on the table, and his expression softened with a familiar understanding. He set the cups down and put a warm, steadying hand on my shoulder. His presence was a silent affirmation, a reminder that I wasn't imagining things, that the dynamic was as unfair as I felt it was. He had been my lone ally in this quiet war for years, the only one who saw the full scope of my labor. I looked up at him, and in his eyes, I found the resolve I'd been missing. "You know, Mom," I said, my voice gaining a new firmness, "I have to go, I'll call you back." I hung up before she could reply. I didn't want to hear her protestations or her thinly veiled commands. I needed silence. I needed to let the magnitude of my decision settle. Michael squeezed my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I shook my head, a slow, deliberate motion. A single tear traced a hot path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of rage, of frustration, of a final, clarifying clarity. I had spent half my life trying to earn my mother's approval, a commodity she handed out to my brother as freely as breath, but withheld from me like a miser's gold. I had poured my time, my energy, and my love onto a beautifully set table, only to have my offerings inspected for flaws. I was done. I was so profoundly, irrevocably done. It wasn't the comment about the gravy that broke me. It was the realization that after 20 years, my best would never be good enough. Michael sat down on the ottoman in front of me, taking my hands in his. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions churning inside me. He didn't need to ask what the call was about. The lines of this particular drama were scripted long ago. "Margaret's greatest hits?" he asked softly. Was it the lumpy gravy again, or did she have a new single to release? A watery laugh escaped me. "The gravy. Apparently, Cousin Carol's new daughter-in-law is a culinary genius who can produce gravy as smooth as silk." "Ah, a classic," he said, his thumb rubbing soothing circles on the back of my hand. "Brittany, you know this is ridiculous. You cooked a meal for nearly 30 people. It was magnificent. If the worst thing anyone can say is that the gravy had a few lumps, you should be getting a medal." "It's not about the gravy, Michael. It's never been about the gravy," I whispered, the words thick with unshed tears. "It's the way she uses it. It's a weapon. She holds up these impossible standards for me, and then David gets a parade for bringing a bottle of wine he probably picked up at a gas station." "I know," he said, his voice firm. "I've been saying it for years. You do everything and he does nothing, yet somehow he's the hero of every holiday story. It's not right. It's never been right." Hearing him say it, so plainly and without hesitation, was like a balm on a raw wound. For so many years, I had wondered if I was being too sensitive, if I was misinterpreting things. But Michael saw it. He had always seen it. He saw the weeks of planning, the late nights spent baking, the mornings I got up at 5 a.m. to put a turkey in the oven. He saw the financial cost we absorbed without complaint, the hundreds of dollars spent on groceries and decorations for each event. He also saw the aftermath, the mountain of dishes I faced alone while everyone else relaxed, and the emotional hangover from my mother's inevitable critiques. Later that evening, my phone rang again. It was David. My stomach clenched. He was no doubt calling as a follow-up to my mother's earlier probe about Easter. "Hey, Britt," he said, his voice breezy and carefree. He was probably calling from his car on the way home from his cushy office job. "Mom said she talked to you earlier. So, what's the game plan for Easter? Ham or lamb? I'm voting for ham, by the way. And make sure you do those scalloped potatoes. The cheesy ones, they're the best." There was no "how are you?" No acknowledgement that this meal would require hours of my labor. It was just a casual placing of an order, as if I were a short-order cook at his personal diner. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of it was breathtaking. His behavior wasn't malicious. It was something almost worse. It was a complete and utter obliviousness, a total lack of awareness that my time and energy were finite resources, not a magical, endlessly renewable spring he could drink from at will. This phone call was different from the one with my mother. Her words were sharp, designed to chip away at my confidence. David's were blunt, heavy with the weight of assumption. Together, they formed the two sides of the same suffocating coin. I took a deep breath, picturing Michael's supportive face. "I'm not sure yet, David," I said, keeping my tone even. "I haven't made any plans." "Well, let me know when you do," he said, completely missing the coolness in my voice. "Just text me the time to show up. Talk to you later." He hung up just like that. The conversation was over because his objective, registering his meal preference, had been achieved. I stared at my phone, feeling a cold fury begin to replace the simmering resentment. They operated as a team, my mother and my brother. She was the critic, the one who set the impossible standards. He was the golden child, the beneficiary of a system that exploited my generosity. They had cast me in the role of the dutiful family servant so long ago that they no longer even saw me as a person with my own needs and limits. They saw a function, a service. They saw a holiday machine that produced ham and cheesy potatoes on command. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, replaying 20 years of holidays in my mind. The time I hosted Christmas with a raging flu because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. The Thanksgiving, I catered to 5 different dietary restrictions without a single word of thanks. The Easters, where I organized elaborate egg hunts for the children, while my brother sat on the couch watching sports, accepting praise for being so good with the kids, when one of them happened to wander into his line of sight. A thought began to form in my mind, a tiny seed of an idea that was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if I just stopped? What if the holiday machine just ground to a halt? But I knew it wasn't that simple. If I just refused, I would be painted as the villain. I'd be difficult, selfish, dramatic. My mother would have a field day, telling everyone how I had selfishly ruined a family tradition. David would be portrayed as the poor, disappointed brother, robbed of his beloved cheesy potatoes. No, a simple refusal wouldn't work. It had to be something else. It had to be a move they couldn't twist. It had to be a strategy that would force them to see the truth. And as I lay there, an image popped into my head. It was me, 20 years younger, standing in a chaotic ballroom with a headset on, clipboard in hand, directing a team of caterers and florists for a massive corporate event. I remembered the thrill of it, the satisfaction of taking 1,000 disparate elements and weaving them into a seamless, perfect experience. I remembered the detailed binders I used to create, the schedules, the budgets, the contingency plans. They saw me as just a sister and a daughter, a homemaker, a cook. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten what I used to do for a living. They had forgotten I was an expert. My career as an event planner had been a lifetime ago, before the kids, before the sprawling suburban house, before I had slowly, almost imperceptibly, been assigned the permanent role of family hostess-in-chief. I had been good at it, too. I thrived on logistics, on the meticulous art of bringing a vision to life. I could coordinate a sit-down dinner for 500 people with less stress than I now felt planning a holiday meal for 25. The irony was suffocating. My professional skills, once a source of pride and income, had been domesticated and downgraded into a thankless family obligation. The sacrifices had started small. When my children were little, hosting was just easier. We had the space, the yard, the toys. It made sense. But as the years went on and the kids grew up, the logic faded and only the expectation remained. I'd given up weekends to shop, evenings to prep, and countless hours to clean before and after. The financial cost was something Michael and I just absorbed, a line item in our budget that we never discussed with anyone else. It was thousands of dollars a year when you factored in the premium groceries, the decorations, the extra wine, the small gifts I'd buy for the nieces and nephews. I remembered one Christmas about 5 years ago. I decided to go all out with a winter wonderland theme. I'd spent a month crafting decorations. Silver branches glittered with tiny lights, handmade snowflakes hung from the ceiling, and the table was a masterpiece of white linens and sparkling crystal. The kids were mesmerized. Even Michael, who was usually immune to festive frippery, admitted it was magical. My family arrived. My mother, Margaret, walked into the dining room, her eyes scanning the scene not with wonder, but with the sharp, discerning gaze of a health inspector. She ran a finger over a silver-painted branch. "A little dusty, isn't it?" she remarked to no one in particular. Later, during dinner, she held up her wine glass to the light. "You know, Brittany, these glasses would really sparkle if you used a bit of vinegar in the rinse water." That was the thanks I received for a month of work. Meanwhile, David arrived with his then-girlfriend, bearing a poinsettia he'd clearly grabbed from the entrance of the grocery store. My mother gasped as if he'd presented her with the crown jewels. "Oh, David, it's beautiful," she'd exclaimed, rushing to find the perfect spot for it. "You are always so thoughtful. You have such an eye for these things." Throughout the meal, she directed praise at him for everything I had done. "David, you must be so pleased with how your sister decorated the house for us. And isn't it wonderful that Brittany Ma Kess your favorite pecan pie every year?" He would just nod and smile, accepting the second-hand compliments as his due. He was the esteemed guest of honor at a party he did nothing to create, while I was the hired help. Margaret's behavior was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She never launched a full frontal assault. Her weapons were passive aggression, backhanded compliments, and the strategic praise of another to highlight my perceived failings. She cultivated the image of a gracious matriarch, all while expertly pulling the strings, ensuring her son remained on his pedestal and I remained in my place, buried under a mountain of expectations and unwashed serving platters. David, for his part, was a willing, if passive, participant in this dynamic. He wasn't a bad person in the grand scheme of things. He was a successful financial advisor, charming and generally well-liked. But he had been so coddled by our mother his entire life that he suffered from a profound case of privilege-induced blindness. He saw labor performed by women, especially women in his family, as a natural resource, something that was just there. He didn't see the hours of work that went into a holiday meal any more than he saw the intricate process that brought electricity to his light switches. He just flipped the switch and expected the light to turn on. He showed up and expected dinner to be on the table. This dynamic had solidified over decades, hardening into an unbreakable family law. Any attempt I made to gently push back was met with a chorus of, "But you're so good at it," or "It wouldn't be the same anywhere else." These were not compliments, they were bars on a cage. They were designed to flatter me into submission, to make me feel indispensable and therefore trapped. The deep, unspoken truth was that my hosting wasn't about family togetherness. It was about convenience. It was easy for everyone else. All they had to do was show up. They bore no cost, no responsibility, and no stress. I bore it all for them, and my reward was a critique of the gravy and watching my brother be praised for bringing a wilted plant. The resentment had become a constant, low-grade fever, a sickness in my soul that flared up with every approaching holiday. It was a poison, and I had been drinking it for a very long time. But now, with the clarity of that final, breaking snap, I knew I had to find the antidote. The plan that was starting to form in my mind wasn't just about getting out of hosting Easter. It was about systemically dismantling the entire rotten structure. It was about forcing them to see the machine they had taken for granted, to understand every single gear and piston they had ignored for 20 years. And I would do it with the one tool they had forgotten I possessed: my professionalism. They wanted me to be the holiday CEO? Fine. I'd start acting like one. And the first order of business was a corporate restructuring. The decision settled over me like a calm, clear dawn after a long and stormy night. For the first time in years, the thought of an approaching holiday didn't fill me with a sense of dread. It filled me with a sense of purpose. Michael was my co-conspirator, fully on board. "It's brilliant," he'd said when I laid out the initial idea. "They won't know what hit them. Use their own logic against them." My clever trap wasn't going to be an emotional outburst or a bitter refusal. It was going to be a binder. A beautiful, comprehensive, intimidatingly professional binder. I spent the next week not planning a menu for Easter, but creating the ultimate holiday hosting guide. This wasn't an investigation into a person's wrongdoing. It was a meticulous documentation of a job's requirements, the job they had all taken for granted. I unearthed my old work computer and fired up the professional software I used to use. I wasn't just jotting down a few recipes. I was creating a full-fledged event plan. I divided the binder into color-coded sections. Section 1 was timelines and checklists. I created a master schedule that began 6 weeks before the holiday. It included tasks like Week 6, finalize guest list and send invitations. Week 4, plan menu and create master grocery list. Week 3, order specialty items e.g. free-range turkey, fresh ham. Week 1, deep clean house, and so on, all the way down to a minute-by-minute schedule for the day of the event itself, starting with 6:00 a.m., brine the turkey, and ending with 10:00 p.m., run final dishwasher load. Section 2 was budget and financials. I created a detailed spreadsheet, using my receipts from the past 3 years to create an average cost. I listed everything: groceries broken down by category, beverages alcoholic and non-alcoholic, decorations, cleaning supplies, even an estimate for the increase in the utility bills. The final number at the bottom was a little over $800 for Thanksgiving and nearly $1,200 for Christmas. Seeing the true cost laid out so clinically was shocking, even to me. Section 3 was menu and recipes. I didn't just include the recipes. I included detailed notes on sourcing ingredients, prep times, and potential allergens. I cross-referenced the recipes with the master grocery list and the cooking schedule. For every dish, I noted, pairs well with, and can be made ahead by X days. The final section was guest management and logistics. This was my masterstroke. I included a complete guest list with notes on everyone's dietary needs. Aunt Carol, severe nut allergy, ensure no cross-contamination. Uncle Jim, low-sodium diet, prepare a separate portion of green beans without salt. Cousin Sarah's kids, vegetarian, ensure a substantive non-meat main course is available. I also included a floor plan for seating arrangements to avoid family conflicts, and a list of vendor contacts for everything from the butcher to the local farm that supplied my fresh flowers. As I compiled the binder, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I was taking all the invisible labor, the mental load that I had carried alone for years, and making it visible. I was translating the language of love and duty into the language of business and logistics, a language my brother, the financial advisor, and my mother, who respected appearances and professionalism above all else, would be forced to understand. The binder was more than a guide. It was irrefutable evidence. When it was finished, it was a thing of beauty. 3 inches thick, with a sleek cover and neatly printed tabs. It was the kind of document I used to present to high-paying clients who understood the value of expertise. The next step was to call the meeting. I sent a simple text to my mother and David. "Hi both, can we all get together for coffee this weekend? I'd like to discuss the upcoming holidays and plan for the future. Saturday at 10 a.m. at my place." The bait was an offer of more of what they already expected, my labor and planning. Of course, they agreed immediately. David texted back, "Sure, we'll be good to get Easter sorted." My mother replied with a simple, "Of course, dear, see you then." On Saturday morning, Michael and I set the stage. We had coffee, pastries from the good bakery, and a calm, bright atmosphere. The binder sat on the coffee table, face down, a silent monolith. They arrived together, David looking relaxed in a polo shirt and my mother looking impeccable as always. They sat on the couch, accepting coffee and making small talk. "So," my mother began, getting right to the point, "Easter, have you decided on the ham?" I smiled, a calm, serene expression I had practiced in the mirror. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about. I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and I've been thinking it's time for a change. I think it's time I officially retired from my hosting duties." The silence in the room was instantaneous and absolute. David's smile faltered. My mother's back stiffened, her perfectly coiffed head tilting slightly. "Retired?" she repeated, the word sounding foreign and absurd on her tongue. "Yes," I said cheerfully, "but I wouldn't want to leave you all in the lurch. I know how important these traditions are, so I thought it was time to pass the torch." "David," I said, turning to him with a brilliant smile, "I think it's your turn to shine. I think you should host Thanksgiving this year." David's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, followed by a flicker of panic, and finally settling on amused disbelief. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Me? Host Thanksgiving? Britt, I live in a 2-bedroom condo, and I can barely make toast. You're the one who's good at all this stuff." "Oh, I have no doubt you can do it," I said, my voice full of unassailable confidence. "You're smart and capable, and besides, I'm not just going to abandon you. I've prepared something to help." This was the moment. I reached for the binder, turned it over, and slid it across the coffee table. It landed with a solid, definitive thud. The title was printed in a clean, bold font on the cover: "The Miller Family Holiday, a comprehensive HOSTING guide." David stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. My mother leaned forward, peering at it over her reading glasses, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval. "What on earth is this?" she asked, her tone icy. "That," I announced proudly, "is everything. It's a complete turnkey solution for hosting any family holiday. It has my timelines, my budgets, my recipes, guest information, everything you need to produce the exact same holiday experience everyone is used to. I've poured 20 years of experience into that binder. It's foolproof." David tentatively reached out and opened it. He flipped through the first few pages of the timeline, his eyes widening. 6 weeks? You start planning 6 weeks ahead of time?" He flipped to the budget section and his jaw went slack. "You spend S much on one dinner." My mother scoffed, picking up on his shock and spinning it into a criticism of me. "Well, that's just ridiculous, Brittany. You always were one for being dramatic. All this paperwork for a simple family dinner. It's not a corporate gala." "It takes the same amount of planning," I replied calmly, my heart beating a steady rhythm. This was going exactly as I'd anticipated. Their dismissal of my work, right to my face, was the foundation of my entire strategy. "Honestly, Britt, this is insane," David said, closing the binder with a snap. He looked at me, a patronizing smile on his face. "I appreciate the effort, really, but this is way overboard. How hard can it be? You buy a turkey, you cook it, people bring some side dishes. We don't need a 3-inch binder to tell us how to have dinner." "People don't bring side dishes, David," Michael interjected, his voice quiet but firm. "Brittany makes everything. The only things people bring are the wine you're told to bring and maybe a dessert that gets ignored because Brittany has already made 4. David had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but he quickly recovered. "Okay, fine, so it's a bit of work, but this manual is it's too much. We'll figure it out. Right, Mom?" My mother, seizing the opportunity to regain control of the narrative, nodded vigorously. "Exactly, we're not helpless. We'll manage Thanksgiving perfectly fine. It will be lovely, maybe a little less structured, more relaxed." I maintained my serene smile. "Wonderful, I'm so glad you're both on board. The torch is officially passed. Of course, I'm here to consult if you need me. My services are at your disposal. Just let me know." The meeting concluded a few minutes later. They left the binder sitting on the table. "You can hang on to that for us," David had said with a wave of his hand. "We won't need it." I insisted. No, it's yours now, my gift to you." I pressed it into his hands as he walked out the door. He took it, balancing it awkwardly under his arm like a textbook for a class he had no intention of attending. After they left, Michael turned to me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Hook, line, and sinker," he said. "They fell for it completely." "They did, didn't they?" I felt a giddy sense of relief. "They think I'm being absurd and overly dramatic. They think the binder is the crazy part." "They don't get it," Michael said, wrapping his arms around me. "They think the binder is the work. They don't understand that the binder is just the description of the work." He was right. Their arrogance was my greatest asset. They had looked at 2 decades of my lived experience, professionally documented and quantified, and dismissed it as a silly hobby. They had no idea that they hadn't just accepted the torch of hosting Thanksgiving. They had accepted the terms of their own spectacular, public failure. The first major confrontation was over, and I had won. Not by shouting or arguing, but by letting them strut confidently into the very trap I had so carefully laid. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were going to be very, very interesting. The silence that followed our meeting was profound. For weeks, I heard nothing about Thanksgiving. I knew my mother and David were talking, likely congratulating themselves on how they were going to host a more relaxed and effortless holiday, free from my supposed neuroticism and obsessive planning. I decided to let them have their space, giving them just enough rope to tangle themselves up completely. At the 4-week mark, as dictated by my binder's schedule, I began to build my case. I sent a cheerful, breezy email to both of them. Subject: Thanksgiving check-in. Hi David and Mom. Hope you're both doing well. Just wanted to send a friendly reminder that we're about a month out from Thanksgiving. As per the timeline on page 7 of the hosting guide, this is the perfect time to finalize the guest list and get the invitations out. It's also the week to pre-order the turkey, especially if you want a fresh, free-range one. The good farms get reserved quickly. Let me know if you have any questions. Happy to help. Best. Brittany. The response from my mother came a day later. It was a single sentence. Everything is under control, Brittany. Please stop worrying. David didn't respond at all. I saved the email in a folder on my computer I'd labeled Project Thanksgiving. 2 weeks later, I sent another. Subject: Ray, Thanksgiving check-in. Hi again. Just a quick follow-up. We're getting closer. This is usually when I plan the full menu to ensure a balanced meal and create the master grocery list. You can find a template on page 24. It's also a good time to check in on Aunt Carol about her nut allergy and make sure any new partners coming don't have dietary restrictions we should know about. The checklist for this week is on page 9. Cheers. Brittany. This time, David replied, his response W. As Kurt, Britt, we've got it, seriously, relax and enjoy your time off. I saved that email, too. Each ignored offer of help, each dismissive reply, was another brick in the wall of their own making. I wasn't just building a case against them. I was creating an irrefutable record of my own diligence and their negligence. The first crack in their confident facade appeared a week before Thanksgiving. My cousin Sarah called me. Hey, Brittany, she said, her voice hesitant. This is a weird question, but what's the plan for Thanksgiving? I haven't heard anything, and I don't know what to tell the kids. Is it at your place like always? Actually, David is hosting this year, I said brightly. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. David, are you serious? But does he even own a roasting pan? I'm sure he and Mom have it all figured out, I said sweetly. You should probably give him a call to coordinate. Within hours, my phone started buzzing with texts from other relatives. Is it true David is hosting? What time should we show up? Can I bring anything? To each one, I gave the same polite, unhelpful response. David and Mom are in charge this year. You'll have to check with them. The stakes were escalating beautifully. The pressure was building, and it was all being directed away from me and squarely onto the 2 people who had so eagerly volunteered for the job. The breaking point came on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, 2 days before the event. My phone rang late in the evening. It was David. His breezy, confident tone was gone, replaced by a tight, high-pitched panic. Britt, I have a problem, he said, without any preamble. What's wrong? I asked, my voice the epitome of calm concern. The turkeys. I went to 3 different grocery stores after work. Nobody has any fresh turkeys left over 12 pounds. We have 24 people coming. What am I supposed to do? Buy 2 tiny ones. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Well, David, as I noted in my email 4 weeks ago and on page 12 of the guide, the large, fresh turkeys need to be ordered 3 to 4 weeks in advance. I included the contact information for 3 local farms that do pre-orders. There was dead silence on his end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the memory of my ignored email clicking into place. "Oh," he finally said, his voice small. "Right, that email." "Did you ever call them?" I asked gently. "No," he admitted. "I figured it couldn't be that hard to find a turkey." "And what about the side dishes? And the pies?" I pressed, keeping my tone helpful. He let out a long, shaky sigh. "Mom was supposed to handle that. She just called me in a total state. She went to the store today and said the crowds were a nightmare, and they were out of half the things on her list. She said she couldn't find canned pumpkin puree anywhere. It sells out the week before Thanksgiving every year," I said matter-of-factly. "That's why the shopping checklist in the guide has you buying all non-perishables 2 weeks out." Another painful silence. "Yeah," he mumbled. "About that guide, I think I might have misplaced it." "Not to worry," I said, unable to keep the triumphant smile from my face. "I have a digital copy. I'll email it to you right now." The spell was beginning to break. For the first time, he was confronted with the concrete consequences of his arrogance. The dinner wasn't just magically appearing. The ingredients weren't just waiting patiently on store shelves. He was discovering that the effortless holidays of his memory were, in fact, the product of a tremendous hidden effort. He was learning that the light doesn't just come on by magic. Someone has to build the power station, run the wires, and, most importantly, pay the bill. The final invoice was about to come due. On Thanksgiving Day, Michael and I arrived at David's condo at precisely 2:00 p.m., the time he had frantically texted to the family that morning. The moment we stepped into the hallway of his building, we could smell it, the acrid scent of something burning. Inside, the scene was one of pure, unadulterated chaos. My brother, his face pale and smudged with flour, was frantically fanning a smoke detector with a dish towel. My mother was standing in the middle of the living room, wringing her hands and looking utterly lost. There were no decorations, no festive music, just the shrill, intermittent chirp of the alarm and an atmosphere thick with stress. Several relatives were already there, huddled awkwardly on the couch, trying to make polite conversation over the din. They all looked up as we entered, their faces a mixture of pity and relief. "Thank goodness you're here," my mother exclaimed, rushing towards me. "Brittany, it's a disaster. The oven is smoking, David can't get the lumps out of the mashed potatoes, and the cranberry sauce is still in the can because he forgot to buy a can opener." I looked past her at the kitchen. It was a war zone. Pots were boiling over on the stove, empty containers littered every surface, and on the counter sat 2 small, sad-looking turkeys, one of which was alarmingly pale while the other was blackened on one side. "What happened to the oven?" I asked calmly. "I don't know," David said, his voice cracking. "I put the sweet potato casserole in, and it just started pouring smoke. Your recipe said to put marshmallows on top." "Did you put a baking sheet under it to catch the drips?" I asked. He stared at me blankly. No, was I supposed to? I didn't answer. I simply walked over to the dining table. It was bare, save for a stack of paper plates and a bundle of plastic cutlery. In a family that was used to my best china and polished silverware, this was the ultimate signal of defeat. The rest of the guests arrived, their cheerful holiday greetings dying on their lips as they took in the scene. The meal was eventually served, nearly 2 hours late. It was, without exaggeration, the worst Thanksgiving dinner I had ever witnessed. The turkey was raw in the middle, the potatoes were gluey, the green beans were limp and gray, and the smoky, burnt marshmallow casserole was scraped into a bowl and presented with a hopeful, "The inside parts are still good." Everyone picked at their food in near silence, the only sound the scraping of plastic forks on paper plates. The failure was total, and it was palpable. And then my mother made her final, fatal mistake. She couldn't stand the humiliation, the irrefutable evidence that she and her golden son were completely inept. She needed a scapegoat. She needed me. She cleared her throat, and a fragile, martyred smile touched her lips. "Well," she began, her voice loud in the quiet room, "it's not always about the food, is it? It's about being together, and we can all be grateful for that, even if things are a bit disorganized this year." She paused, then turned her gaze on me. Of course, if Brittany had offered to help a little more, instead of just sending us that ridiculous, complicated book, I'm sure things would have gone more smoothly. The entire table went silent. Every eye turned to me. This was the moment, the culmination of my entire plan. I placed my plastic fork down gently. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let a single flicker of anger show on my face. I looked at my mother, then let my calm gaze travel around the table, meeting the eyes of each family member. I did offer to help, I said, my voice clear and steady. I offered to help many times. In fact, since there seems to be some confusion, I brought my copies of the correspondence, just to clear things up. I reached into the bag I'd brought and pulled out a slim file folder. From it, I produced a printed copy of my first email. This is an email I sent to both David and Mom 4 weeks ago, I announced to the room. In it, I reminded them to order the turkey. David, I believe your panicked search for a turkey on Tuesday proves that this advice was, perhaps, not so ridiculous. I then produced the second email. And this one was sent 2 weeks ago, with a reminder to finalize the menu and shop for non-perishables before the stores became chaotic. Mom, I believe you mentioned something about not being able to find canned pumpkin. My mother's face had gone chalky white. David was staring down at his paper plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. I wasn't finished. I offered my help over the phone as well. And as for the complicated book, I said, my voice hardening just slightly, that binder contained 23 years of my experience. It contained the exact blueprint for the holidays you have all enjoyed in my home for years. A holiday, I might add, that takes approximately 80 hours of planning and labor to execute and costs, on average, $800. It's all in the budget section you both laughed at. I let that sink in. The air was thick with stunned silence. Then David looked up. His eyes were shining with unshed tears of shame and understanding. He looked at me, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me. He saw the work, the effort, the love. He pushed his chair back and stood up. She's right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned to our mother. She's right, Mom. We were arrogant. We thought we knew better. We laughed at her, and we shouldn't have. He then looked directly at me, his expression full of a remorse so profound it was heartbreaking. I had no idea, Britt. I am so sorry. That was it, the public admission, the final, triumphant vindication. My mother sat frozen, speechless, exposed in front of the entire family she had tried to manipulate. The golden child had shattered his own pedestal. My trap hadn't just worked, it had brought down the whole corrupt system. The disastrous Thanksgiving of that year became a legend in our family, spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. It was the D. The old world ended. My mother's downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, thorough dismantling of her authority. Having been publicly contradicted by her favorite son and exposed as ungrateful in front of everyone, her primary tools of manipulation, criticism and favoritism, were rendered useless. She was silenced not by anger, but by facts. For the first time in my adult life, she had no ground to stand on, no narrative she could spin. In the awkward, strained days that followed, David called me. It wasn't a quick, perfunctory apology. We talked for over an hour, and it was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. He admitted that he had always seen the holidays through a lens of pure entitlement. They were just things that happened, events that he graced with his presence. He had never once considered the sheer volume of work that went into them. He apologized for every time he took me for granted, for every time he accepted praise he hadn't earned, and for every time he stood by silently while our mother criticized me. It was a heartfelt, painful, and absolutely necessary conversation. Our relationship, which had been a shallow thing built on habit and assumption, could finally be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect. That Christmas was the quietest I'd had in 25 years. Michael, our 2 grown children, and I spent the day at home. We ordered in a gourmet meal from a local restaurant, drank champagne, and watched old movies in our pajamas. There was no stress, no schedule, no mountain of dishes. It was simple, peaceful, and utterly blissful. The joy I felt was so pure, so unburdened, that it felt like I was breathing fresh air after decades in a stuffy room. True to my nature, I couldn't completely abandon my planning skills. I channeled my energy into something more fulfilling. I reached out to a local community shelter and used my professional network to help them organize their holiday dinner for families in need. Coordinating donations, scheduling volunteers, and creating a festive atmosphere for people who truly needed it gave me a sense of purpose that no amount of forced family hosting ever had. It was a reminder that my skills were valuable and could be a source of genuine good in the world. The family dynamic shifted permanently. There were no more grand, mandatory holiday gatherings at a single person's home. The following Easter, my cousin Sarah organized a potluck brunch at a local park. Thanksgiving became a rotating affair, with different family members hosting smaller, more manageable groups. David even hosted a 4th of July barbecue, and he proudly sent me a photo of a timeline he had made himself. It was a small, simple thing, but it was a start. My mother eventually adjusted to the new reality, though she never explicitly apologized. Her approval was no longer something I strived for. By releasing myself from that impossible expectation, I had taken back all my power. I now attended family events not as a stressed-out servant, but as a relaxed and honored guest, free to leave whenever I pleased. The greatest gift I gave myself was the freedom from resentment. By setting my trap, I hadn't just sought revenge, I had sought the truth. The binder was my testimony, the failed Thanksgiving was the verdict, and David's apology was the absolution. I had not only freed myself from the burden of hosting, but also from the poison of bitterness that had been slowly eating away at me for years. I had found peace, not by demanding respect, but by creating a situation where it was the only possible outcome. My home was finally my own sanctuary again, a place of rest and joy, no longer just a venue for the next command performance.